The knock on the door came at exactly 6:14 a.m. on a bone-chilling January morning in 2024. For Detective Sarah Blackwood, it was the end of a 3-decade-long pursuit. For the residents of 1477 Aspen Drive, it was the day their quiet, orderly world shattered. "Florida State Police, open up!" The police officers responded quickly, encircling the small suburban house. Neighbors looked through curtains in interest, mouths agape as their longtime neighbor, a retired school facilities worker, choir member at church, and grandfather of 4, was handcuffed and taken away. No one suspected a thing. No one knew. But more than 2 decades ago, on December 17, 1990, Interstate 80 was being shrouded in heavy snow when 19-year-old Meline Crow Feather ventured from the comfort of the Wind River truck stop into the cold Florida night and vanished into thin air. Meline, whose mother was Chosonyi and whose father was white, was a firecracker. She had an infectious laugh and an unbreakable drive. She was determined to be the first person in her family to graduate from college, taking night classes to cover her tuition. She was only months short of finishing her degree in nursing by that winter. Her vanishing into thin air created a gash in her community that never healed. For 34 years, investigators sifted through mountains of evidence, chased hundreds of leads, and watched promising suspects slip away. Her family marked birthdays, holidays, and anniversaries with an empty chair at the table, until a single hair, preserved since 1990, finally spoke under modern DNA analysis. Imagine losing someone without a trace. Could you ever stop searching? Could you endure discovering the truth decades later? The arrest shocked Florida. The suspect had been hiding in plain sight, residing within less than 50 miles of where Meline was last observed. Even more disconcerting was his secret connection to the case, something that no one had ever even thought to suspect. If you're fascinated by how contemporary science will finally serve justice in decades-old cases, click subscribe and become part of our community investigating the most fascinating cold cases solved in America. Each year, breakthroughs in forensics are rewriting what we used to think was possible, and you won't want to miss a single story. Tonight, we examine the case that plagued Florida for more than 3 decades and the cutting-edge technology that ultimately provided a family with answers they had been seeking. Meline Crow Feather wasn't even working that night. Her roommate had called in sick, and Meline, being so helpful, offered to do the extra shift at the Wind River truck stop, a 24-hour oasis for long-distance truckers dealing with the dangerous winter driving conditions on Interstate 80. Born in 1971 on the Wind River Reservation, Meline was always different. Her Shoshone name, Soaring Eagle, appeared to predestine her indomitable spirit. The middle of 5 children, she was standout, stealthily confident, academically gifted, and a born leader. While her brothers excelled on the athletic field, Meline discovered her mission in books and classrooms, studying with straight A's despite the chronic underfunding of reservation schools. She would do things, her big sister Janet Two Moons remembered long after. When Meline made up her mind to do something, nothing at all, could prevent it. Not poverty, not prejudice, not a thing. By the age of 19, she had already overcome substantial odds. She won a partial scholarship to the University of Florida's nursing school and carried a 3.8 GPA while working nights to pay her own way. Her professors characterized her as fantastically committed, a young woman meant to accomplish great things. Her intention was straightforward and simple: complete her degree, return to the reservation, and assist in alleviating the severe shortage of healthcare professionals providing care to Native communities. December 17th, 1990, was like any typical Monday morning. Meline went to morning classes, worked at the library until 4 p.m., then rode her old 1984 Honda Civic to her apartment to get ready for the surprise night shift. Security tapes later salvaged from a nearby bank across the street recorded her showing up at the truck stop at 6:48 p.m. Wrapped up for the blizzard in her trademark blue parka with fur-lined hood, the Wind River truck stop stood isolated at exit 152, a rambling little complex with diner, convenience store, showers, and a short motel annex. During winter storms, it tended to be an unofficial community center, a sanctuary for travelers hunkering down through hazardous road conditions. That evening, a violent blizzard had prompted the Florida Department of Transportation to close stretches of I-80, leaving the truck stop unusually busy. Every parking stall was occupied by stranded drivers. Within the neon-lit diner, the air rang with talk of road closures and weather reports. Meline glided from table to table, refilling coffee mugs and delivering Monday night's special, meatloaf with mashed potatoes. Hank Gillespie, a fixture, would remember that she was in good spirits, even cheerful amidst the mayhem. She had an ability to pick up people's spirits, teasing patrons they were all storm refugees together. Her supervisor, Doris Whitaker, recalled that Meline's shift was scheduled to end at midnight, but as the crowd did not appear to dissipate, she worked until 2 a.m., ensuring that each diner left contented. Security cameras also caught her serving her final table at 1:48 a.m., and then going back to the break room to collect her belongings. At precisely 2:07 a.m., outside cameras caught Meline exiting the employee door at the rear. She raised her hood against the blowing snow and headed for the employee parking area, nestled behind a small clump of pine trees that obstructed part of the camera's view. And then she disappeared. She never made it to her car. The following morning, at the onset of the day shift at 6 a.m., Meline's Honda sat in the lot, covered with fresh snow. No footprints, no struggle. Her purse was still locked in her locker, and her keys were nowhere to be found. Initially, her vanishing made little impact in the press. The first newspaper report came in a brief paragraph on page 8 of the Florida Tribune-Eagle 3 days later. Local television featured short bits with reports on the storm and speculation she may have taken a ride from someone who had been stranded during the blizzard. But on the reservation, the reaction was immediate and fierce. Within 24 hours, family members were combing the area around the truck stop despite the harsh winter weather. Community members printed flyers, distributing them across 3 counties. Tribal elders held prayer ceremonies while younger members took to the then-new internet message boards to spread the word. They knew immediately that something was amiss, said Meline's father, Thomas Crow Feather. My daughter wasn't going to leave behind her car, her job, her education. Something did occur to her that evening, and we were not going to wait for officials to take it seriously. In those early pivotal days, 2 distinct investigations got underway. One was the formal police investigation, hindered by jurisdictional conflicts between county and tribal governments. The other was the family's persistent, frantic search, leaving no lead unexplored. Where are you watching from today? Share your location in the comments. We want to know how far Meline's story has traveled and how communities react to cases like hers. Your voice counts. The initial 48 hours of any missing persons case can be crucial. For Meline, those hours were consumed in a red tape nightmare that would plague investigators for decades. When the truck stop manager called the Fremont County Sheriff's Office at 7:13 a.m., the responding deputy designated the case as a walkaway, indicating Meline had voluntarily left. That initial misassumption, in spite of the car and possessions remaining, would establish an ominous pattern for the events that transpired. They were always saying she most likely hitched a ride with a truck driver, said Doris Whitaker, but anyone who knew Meline knew that was absurd. She wasn't irresponsible. She was responsible. The deputy took down basic information and vowed to keep an eye out, but no detective was assigned for 3 full days. No crime scene technicians ever investigated the parking lot exit or employee parking area. By the time detectives knew how serious this was, the scene had already been contaminated. Snow, foot traffic, and ice had eliminated any of the delicate clues that may have been present. Detective Ray Hawkins was finally assigned on December 20th, but walked into a nightmare of jurisdictional disarray. The truck stop was located along the border between Fremont County and the Wind River Reservation. Who should be in charge? The tribal police, county sheriff's deputies, or the FBI? We were being bounced between the agencies, Janet Two Moons remembered. The tribal police said it occurred off-reservation. The county said they had to have federal resources, and the FBI said they had to have more proof of foul play before committing. It was like ping-pong with our daughter's life on the table. As the bureaucrats deliberated, the Crow Feather family did not wait. Thomas Crow Feather, Meline's father, mobilized volunteer search parties to sweep the 5-mile radius around the truck stop. Her brothers canvassed every employee, every regular patron. Her mother, Sarah, converted their living room into a command post, unrolling maps on the floor, striking through areas that had been searched, and keeping scrupulous records of likely witnesses. The first legitimate lead was provided by a truck driver. He recalled seeing a young woman, approximating Meline's appearance, speaking to someone inside a dark pickup truck at about 2 a.m. But in 1990, decades before high-definition cameras and digital documentation, the truck stop footage, grainy and indistinct, revealed little more than indistinct shapes. No license plate, no discernible faces. By the end of December, the family's incessant campaigning compelled the authorities to get into gear. The FBI officially joined the case, tasking Agent Dennis Blackburn as the liaison with the local police. The evidence was already tainted, Blackburn conceded years later. We were playing catch-up from day one, working with witnesses whose memories were already deteriorating and a crime scene open to the elements for days. 3 weeks later, when Meline went missing, police believed they had finally found something. A standard traffic stop in Utah resulted in the arrest of a truck driver who had previous sexual assault charges and was at the Wind River truck stop on the night of Meline's disappearance. His logbooks proved he was there, and the search of his truck uncovered a woman's clothing not belonging to his wife. For a brief moment, the case appeared to be solved. But preliminary DNA tests, a new technology at the time, revealed the clothes were not those of any missing persons, not Meline or anyone else. The suspect also had a strong alibi, having been located hundreds of miles away by 3 a.m. He was let go, and the case ground to a halt again. Throughout early 1991, dozens of similar leads cropped up, then fizzled. A hitchhiker reported being offered a ride by a man who bragged about taking a native girl. He was never found. A convenience store clerk thought she saw Meline 200 meters from the truck stop. Security footage proved otherwise. Anonymous tips poured in through the new hotline, overwhelming the tiny investigative team and making it hard to separate fact from rumor. At the same time, the Crow Feather family bore the brunt of institutionalized neglect. We felt invisible, Janet explained. When white college students disappeared, there were statewide searches. We had to fight for every resource, every news story, every FBI hour devoted to her case. By the summer of 1991, once thriving investigation was reduced to one file box in the back of the Fremont County Sheriff's Office. The FBI still had technical jurisdiction, but allocated no full-time agents. The case that would eventually stun Florida was already sliding down the road to irrelevance. As 1991 dissolved into 1992, the vanishing of Meline Crow Feather fell away from urgent probe to periodic examination, and at last to the status every family fears, a cold case. In March of 1992, the Fremont County Sheriff's Office formally designated Meline's case a cold case, relegating it to a quarterly checked file only for leads. By 1993, even the quarterly checks became mere yearly formalities. The boxes of evidence, the blue parka found in a ditch 3 miles from the truck stop in April 1991, hair samples from Meline's brush, and the original security footage were transferred to a storage facility where they would sit largely untouched for nearly 2 decades. But while official attention faded, the Crow Feather family's determination never did. Everyone thought we should just accept that she was gone and move on, Thomas Crow Feather said. But how do you move on when you don't know what happened? When there is no grave to visit? When each unidentified body you hear about in the news gives your heart a stop? Each year on December 17th, the family hosted a candlelight vigil at the Wind River truck stop. The first time, more than 300 people from the community came. In 1995, fewer than 50 attended. By the year 2000, it was largely family and close friends, but they never missed a year. Sarah Crow Feather converted their living room into what she referred to as Meline's room. Maps with search areas, timelines, newspaper articles, and photographs lined the walls. A tip line dedicated to the cause, the Meline line, was kept open, with Sarah taking every call personally, day or night. Janet Two Moons suspended her own life, setting aside marriage and vocational ambitions to serve as her sister's full-time advocate. She took a course in paralegalism, specifically to be able to handle the legal system better, learning how to draft press releases, coordinate searches, and work with the police. We learned to be experts at things no family should ever have to know, Janet said. Missing persons statistics, decay timetables, cold case procedures, DNA sampling protocols. We self-taught ourselves because we had to. Their finances were stretched to the breaking point. The family spent more than $120,000 by 1996 on private investigators, billboard leases, reward funds, and travel for following up on possible sightings. Thomas worked a second job, Sarah sold heirlooms, and Meline's brothers contributed fractions of their military pay. Their persistence would sometimes give rise to new hope. In 1994, a nationally syndicated true crime program presented Meline's case, and dozens of tips poured in, none of which worked out. In 1997, a woman in Colorado reported that her ex-husband had confessed to murdering a native girl off a highway, only to recant when the FBI confronted him. Every false clue was its own toll. The worst part wasn't so much losing Meline, Thomas said. It was losing her over and over again every time we thought we might finally get some answers. The long, exasperating course of the investigation echoed a larger, sorrowful trend. Indigenous women's cases were covered less in the press, had fewer resources devoted to them, and were given lower priority. A 1999 Department of Justice report found that missing persons cases involving Native American women were 4 times less likely to be solved than cases involving white women of the same age. By the early 2000s, the family had learned to cope with a catastrophic new normal. They continued to fight for Meline while attempting to rebuild shattered lives. Janet eventually married and had children, naming her daughter Meline. Thomas and Sarah divorced in 2003. The tension of mutual tragedy too much to bear. Nevertheless, they never ceased to pressure authorities. Each time the sheriff's office or local FBI field office changed hands, the family made requests to meet with new staff to bring them up to speed. With each improvement in forensic technology, letters were sent demanding evidence be reanalyzed, most of which remained ignored. The breakthrough arrived in 2008 when Janet teamed up with the recently established Florida Cold Case Coalition, a team of volunteers comprising former law enforcement personnel, forensic scientists, and victim advocates. With their advice, she discovered familial DNA searches, touch DNA, and genetic genealogy methods, means unavailable during Meline's time of disappearance. For the first time in years, I felt hope, Janet remembered. True science-based hope, not just wishful thinking. The Florida Cold Case Coalition assisted the family in petitioning for a formal review. Months of bureaucratic resistance ensued before, in January 2010, almost 2 decades since Meline disappeared, the FBI formally reopened the case as part of a larger effort against unsolved crimes against Native American victims. Agent Kimberly White was tasked with commanding the reinvestigation. Different from her predecessors, she came at the case with new eyes and new forensic technology. First things first, an exhaustive inventory of all physical evidence. Janet recalls hearing her phone ring. I couldn't believe there was so much evidence that hadn't ever been thoroughly tested or investigated, she said. Agent White informed her, Mrs. Two Moons, I can't guarantee we're going to solve this case, but I can guarantee we're going to give it the investigation it deserved 20 years ago. For the first time in 2 decades, the long silence surrounding Meline's case began to break. The family who had refused to forget were about to see just how right they had been to keep fighting. If you believe cold cases like Meline's deserve more attention and resources, hit that like button now. Your engagement helps these stories reach wider audiences and reminds law enforcement that justice matters, even decades later. And tell us, what time is it where you're watching? Drop it in the comments. This case spans time zones and decades, from the pre-digital age to today's cutting-edge forensic capabilities. When Meline disappeared in 1990, DNA testing did exist, but in a form just about unrecognizable by contemporary standards. Police had gathered biological evidence, hairs from her hairbrush, fibers from her found parka, and partial prints from her wrecked car. But the means to maximize these leads simply did not exist. In 1990, we required a blood sample roughly the size of a quarter just to create a DNA profile, said Dr. Ella Romero, who works in the FBI lab as a forensic scientist. And even then, results were significantly less conclusive than what we can do today. The initial testing in Meline's case employed RFLP analysis, restriction fragment length polymorphism, a technique that demands large amounts of well-preserved DNA samples and takes weeks to run. Profiles for elimination were given by hair from Meline's brush, but the single hair on her retrieved parka, which may have belonged to her abductor, couldn't be analyzed using 1990s technology. By 2010, forensic science had made great leaps. PCR amplification, routine by the mid-1990s, made it possible to replicate infinitesimal DNA samples into testable amounts. Short tandem repeat STR testing, introduced about 2000, provided much more discriminatory power with even smaller samples. Every decade saw exponential advances. Tests that used to require visible quantities of material can now be conducted on cells too small to see, Dr. Romero said. Agent White's first action was to send the original evidence to the FBI's revamped laboratory in Quantico, Virginia. Previously tested items were retested using modern methods, while evidence that had once been deemed insufficient now became prime candidates for analysis. The break came from a place nobody expected: a single hair discovered on the collar of Meline's blue jacket, found months after she vanished in 1991. At the time, the hair was recorded as unidentifiable. They couldn't even be sure it was human or animal, Agent White said. In 2010, they knew it was human. By 2015, the mitochondrial DNA had been successfully obtained. But there was one more obstacle. The DNA was not matched in CODIS, the National DNA Database. The sample was stored, hoping technology would soon catch up. The epiphany finally came in 2020 when the FBI lab started applying a new method: forensic genetic genealogy, the same one that had caught the Golden State Killer in 2018. In contrast to conventional DNA matching, which involves a direct hit in criminal databases, genetic genealogy compares markers common among relatives to construct family trees of possible suspects. It draws upon public genealogy sites where individuals have uploaded their genetic data voluntarily. It's like you have millions of distant cousins who are assisting you in solving a case, said Linda Ramirez, the genetic genealogist who worked on Meline's case in 2021. We're not seeking the offender themselves. We begin with their genetic relatives and follow back to determine who they are. The individual hair that was once thought worthless in 1991 now held enough genetic material to construct a family tree. Ramirez followed several distant relatives who had unique genetic markers in the sample. With diligent research, she charted links that went back many generations. We began with fifth and sixth cousins, then third cousins, then down to first cousins, Ramirez explained. They then came up with a family that was resident within 30 miles of the Wind River truck stop in 1990. 3 male relatives in the appropriate age group were identified from there. 2 were immediately eliminated by direct comparison of DNA. The third man, a man who had departed Florida in 1996 and who now resided in a Denver suburb under a somewhat changed name, came into focus. In November 2023, agents took a discarded coffee cup from him. The DNA pulled from it aligned with the hair on Meline's parka with 99.9998% confidence. That one coffee cup ended a 34-year loop. From one strand of hair, once thought valueless, to absolute scientific certainty, Agent White declared. This demonstrates how persistence and changing science can crack the seemingly uncrackable. We want to hear your theories. Who might have had a motive to harm a bright, determined young nursing student? What connection could the perpetrator have had to the truck stop? Or to Meline herself? Comment below with your thoughts on how someone could hide in plain sight for so long. And then, on January 12, 2024, at precisely 6:14 a.m., an FBI tactical unit surrounded a small 2-story house in Thornton, Colorado. Inside the house was 62-year-old Robert James Keller, a retired school maintenance man, grandfather of 4, and dedicated church volunteer who had made friends with neighbors. In just minutes, the man who had evaded justice for over 3 decades was handcuffed. His carefully built existence collapsed around him. Nobody saw it coming. Not his 28-year wife, not his adult children, not the community that had welcomed him. Keller's arrest rocked 2 communities: the Denver suburb where he had lived a quiet life, and the Florida town where he had run decades ago, whose residents struggled to reconcile the monster now exposed with the man whom they believed they knew. "Bobby Keller?" asked Harold Thompson, who had worked alongside him in the Wind River School District from 1988 to 1995. "It can't be. He was quiet, kept to himself, but good at repairs. Nothing about him was wrong." What Thompson and others didn't realize was that in 1990, Keller was a part-time maintenance contractor for several businesses along Interstate 80, including the Wind River truck stop. Court papers showed that he had unrestricted access to all parts of the truck stop, including off-limits areas. He had utility room keys, knew where camera blind spots were, and worked odd hours late at night when few individuals were present. "He was practically invisible," Agent White said. "Maintenance people are usually. They arrive and depart at strange times and nobody notices much." Keller was familiar with the truck stop layout better than anyone else, even the location where cameras couldn't reach. As per the arrest affidavit, he was present at the truck stop on the night Meline disappeared, allegedly repairing a leaky pipe in the men's restroom. He was caught on security cameras entering at 11:42 p.m. and exiting at 2:24 a.m., a mere 17 minutes after Meline had left the employee exit. For 34 years, this tape had been examined hundreds of times, and still, Keller never crossed anyone's mind. His appearance was normal, his timing incidental. He had even been questioned as a potential witness back in 1991, reporting he saw nothing out of the ordinary. Policemen gave up, not realizing they were interviewing the criminal himself. "It's the ideal cover," said criminal psychologist Dr. Hannah Morrison. "Maintenance employees, custodians, repairmen, they have access and cover. They're functionally invisible in high-traffic environments." Keller took advantage of that visibility flawlessly. Following Meline's disappearance, he went about his normal routines for almost 6 years. He remained working for the school system, held on to his contract work, and provided no indication of malfeasance. Then in late 1996, he suddenly quit, sold his house, and moved to Colorado. He rebuilt his life there with quiet changes. Robert James Keller became Bob J. Keller. He obtained new professional credentials, got a job with the Adams County School District, and married a divorced mother of 2. He became involved at his neighborhood church, helped with youth activities, and built a reputation as reliable, if taciturn. "He created a new story," said Dr. Morrison. "Not an entire identity shift that would raise suspicion, but just enough separation from what had come before to prevent associations with Florida." But Keller could not have foreseen the advance of forensic science, or that a single strand of hair on Meline's parka would ultimately incriminate him. After he was named as a suspect, police found appalling patterns. Property records showed he had resided a mere 2.4 miles from the truck stop in 1990. Employment records indicated he had done maintenance work at 3 other sites where young women reported being stalked or harassed between 1989 and 1995, though no charges were ever brought. Most incriminating of all, a search of his home in Colorado uncovered a secret box filled with what prosecutors have termed trophies. Tiny personal items with no relation to his life now, but consistent with descriptions of missing property from a number of women. Meline's distinctive silver feather earring, made by her mother. The response of the communities was deep-seated. In Florida, citizens grappled with feelings of guilt that a man they'd known could have such evil. In Colorado, neighbors couldn't believe that the quiet grandfather down the street had such awful secrets. "You think you know people," Margaret Wheeler, who lived on the other side of Keller for 15 years, said. "We invited him to barbecues. He repaired my grandson's bike. How do you reconcile that man with this monster?" The arrest was a complicated blend of relief and sorrow for the Wind River Reservation community. Justice clouded by anger that Keller had spent decades living free while Meline lost her future. He had a whole life: marriage, kids, grandkids, holidays, birthdays. Janet Two Moons had said, her voice cracking. He took all that from Meline. She would be 53 now, possibly with kids and grandkids of her own. He stole all those chances from her, from us. As Keller awaits trial, scheduled for September 2024, both communities grapple with an unsettling truth. Predators often don't match our expectations. They aren't always menacing or socially isolated. Sometimes they are the reliable maintenance man who fixes a leaky pipe, the friendly neighbor waving across the street, the grandfather volunteering at church functions. They hide in plain sight, counting on our tendency to overlook the familiar. What's the weather like in your area today? Leave a comment. Love to see the varying conditions around our viewer base. Similar to weather conditions, criminal cases appear entirely different based on perception and locale. Your perspective counts. After years on hold, the wheels of justice finally turn. Robert Keller's January 2024 arrest launched a judicial process that would challenge both the latest in forensic science and the strength of a family that never lost hope of knowing what had happened to them. Florida prosecutors had a daunting challenge: constructing a murder case with no body, using evidence gathered prior to when most of them were even in law school. State Attorney General Melissa Hartman took personal charge, gathering a specialized cold case prosecution team from various jurisdictions. This isn't just about convicting Robert Keller, Hartman told a crowded press conference. It's about sending a message. Time doesn't erase culpability. Native victims matter. Families deserve resolution, no matter how many years have passed. Pretrial motions commenced in March 2024. Keller's defense lawyers jumped into action, quickly attempting to suppress the DNA evidence on the grounds that holding biological samples for 34 years was beyond reasonable storage periods and that forensic genealogy breached privacy rights. Judge Samuel White dismissed these objections, referencing similar cold cases precedents and highlighting the fact that preservation of evidence in homicide cases has no time limit under statute. Then the defense asked for a change of venue, alleging Keller could not get a fair trial in Fremont County because feelings about Meline's vanishing were too intense. The request was granted, relocating the trial to Casper, Florida, far enough to enable potential juror impartiality, but close enough to be inside the state where the crime had been committed. Jury selection was particularly challenging. Prospective jurors who had been monitoring the case for decades were vetted for prejudice. Those who were too young to have knowledge of the initial disappearance were asked if they were aware of current thinking. It took 11 days to seat a jury of 9 women and 3 men, 2 of them Native American, a makeup Janet Two Moons would later refer to as the first recognition that Meline's heritage was important. The trial started on June 17, 2024, precisely 33 years and 6 months since Meline disappeared. The opening statement of the prosecution highlighted not just Keller's conduct, but Meline's lost potential. Her nursing profession cut short in its prime, her family left suspended in anguish, and the community denied her talents. Evidence presentation highlighted the ways in which contemporary science had reinvigorated the case. FBI forensic specialists told jurors how methods impossible in 1990 now produced conclusive findings from tiny samples. The single hair once worthless became the linchpin linking Keller to Meline, they testified. This strand holds a full genetic record, said Dr. Elaine Romero, displaying an enlarged copy of the hair. It tells us, with virtually no doubt, that Mr. Keller was in physical contact with Meline's clothing at the time of her disappearance, contrary to his assertions that he never came into contact with her. Aside from the DNA evidence, the prosecutors pieced together Keller's movements through reanalyzed security tapes upgraded with digital technology. Timestamps showed that while his maintenance task in the men's restroom had ended by midnight, he lingered on the grounds for more than 2 hours with no recorded explanation. The trophy box in Keller's Colorado residence contained compelling evidence about his conduct. Forensic psychologist Dr. James Levinson testified that collections such as this one are typical of serial offenders, who gain continuous gratification from having objects associated with their victims. Among the many items seized, Meline's silver feather earring elicited audible gasps in the courtroom when Meline Crow Feather recognized it as the one she had personally made for her daughter's 19th birthday. Even more incriminating was evidence of Keller having followed the case for years, keeping electronic files of newspaper stories on Meline's vanishing and the continued investigation. His web history included queries regarding forensic progress and cold case clearance rates, brutally obvious signs that he had been secretly concerned with being apprehended. The defense emphasized inconsistencies in the timeline and the absence of a body, claiming the state could not establish beyond reasonable doubt that there was a homicide. They even posited that Meline could have left voluntarily, possibly under the pressure of academic or familial obligations. This line of defense collapsed when Meline's academic advisor and former peers testified to her commitment and passion for her nursing profession. Financial records showed she had made a deposit in her savings account the day before she disappeared, not at all the action of someone planning to flee. The jury deliberated only 7 hours after 2 weeks of testimony before giving their verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. All the members of the Crow Feather family spoke to the court during the August 2024 sentencing. Thomas testified about fishing trips with his daughter and her high school graduation. Sarah spoke about the hand-stitched nursing scrubs she had made for Meline's rotations, uniforms her daughter would never use. Janet said her own kids had only learned about their aunt from pictures and stories. When Judge White asked Keller if he wanted to say anything, he said nothing, just as he had during the trial. The judge sentenced him to life without parole, citing that, although Florida permits capital punishment, prosecutors had refrained from seeking the death penalty in order not to open up lengthy appeals that would keep closure from the family. "Your silence," Judge White replied, "deprives this family of one last thing they deserve, an answer to where Meline lies. That is a cruelty that multiplies your offense." Outside the courthouse in Florida's warm sunlight, the Crow Feather family spoke with reporters. There were no parties, no boastful statements, only quiet acceptance that a chapter had finally been closed. Thomas, 74 now and using a cane, said little. Today doesn't bring Meline back, but perhaps tonight she sleeps a little more soundly because he can't hurt anyone else. 34 years, 12,410 days. The interval between a snowy December night in 1990 and the August 2024 guilty verdict is more than time. It is the measure of the transformation of justice itself. Meline Crow Feather's case is a compelling witness to the interplay between scientific progress, indefatigable family resolve, and society's increasing awareness that all victims are entitled to equal consideration. Her case spans centuries, from the crude DNA testing of the early 1990s to today's advanced genetic genealogy, from the isolation of Aboriginal victims to the establishment of specialized task forces, from dusty cold case files to national guidelines now named for her. For the families still stuck in the limbo of unsolved cases, Meline's tale is a beacon of hope and a guide. It demonstrates that evidence that has been kept alive today, even if it appears inconsequential, can someday scream loudly using technology not yet discovered. It confirms the tenacity that some would term madness. It demonstrates that justice, while occasionally interminably slow, is still achievable. The Wind River truck stop, where Meline's last footsteps were, still stands, albeit under a new name. Suspended from the employee exit door is a tiny plaque, its daily reminder to employees: remember Meline, and now you remember her too. If Meline's case touched your heart, pass this video along. Each share raises the possibility that someone, somewhere, will see something from another cold case that will ring a bell and motivate someone to continue advocating for another loved one. Justice for one family can provide hope for many more. What cold case should we feature next on our channel? Leave your ideas in the comments below. Your engagement helps bring light to overlooked cases that need closure.